He was called the next Ballon d'Or winner, a magician, a player who could dance through defenses as if gravity didn't apply to him. At Chelsea, he was untouchable, a nightmare for defenders, an artist with the ball, a genius capable of rewriting a game's script with a single moment of brilliance. Every weekend, Stamford Bridge became a theater, and Hazard was its main actor. A flick of the boot, a drop of the shoulder, a sudden acceleration. Within seconds, he could leave an entire defense in ruins. Fans watched in awe, convinced they were witnessing the rise of a footballing legend. But then, everything changed. What happened to Eden Hazard? How did one of the most electrifying players in Premier League history become one of football's greatest disappointments? Was he ever truly destined for greatness? Or were we all deceived by a carefully crafted illusion? At Real Madrid, Hazard was no longer the same player. The agility, the hunger, the spark, it all faded. The fearless dribbles turned hesitant. The explosiveness disappeared. And the man who once carried Chelsea now struggled to even stay fit. It was like watching an artist lose his brushstrokes, a composer lose his melody. How does a player who once made defenders tremble suddenly become a shadow of himself? Was it injuries? Was it bad luck? Or was it something deeper? Something that no one dared to say out loud? Let's rewind. Let's go back to the days when Hazard was untouchable, when the world believed he was football's next king. His dribbling was hypnotic, his acceleration unstoppable, his vision unmatched. He played with joy, with freedom, with an effortless brilliance that made it seem as though he was playing a different sport altogether. But beneath all the magic, there was always something missing, something that separated him from the true greats. Because talent alone is never enough. And if you look closer, the warning signs were always there. At Chelsea, he was given absolute freedom. No pressure to score 50 goals a season. No demand to be an obsessive perfectionist. He played football as an art form, not as a relentless pursuit of legacy. But was he ever truly obsessed with greatness? Did he ever possess the unshakable mentality of a Cristiano Ronaldo? Or did he simply shine because he was in the perfect environment, a system designed for him to thrive? The truth is, Hazard never lived and breathed football the way the greatest do. He never sacrificed everything to be at the top. He was a genius, yes. But was he a warrior? Was he a leader? That is the question that will define his legacy. At Real Madrid, the expectations were different. He was no longer just a star. He was expected to be the star, the leader, the game changer. Real Madrid is not a club that waits, that forgives, that allows time for transition. It is a club where only the obsessed survive. A club where every single touch, every sprint, every decision must be executed with absolute perfection. And that's when the illusion began to shatter. From the moment he arrived in Madrid, something felt wrong. His debut season should have been the beginning of an era. Instead, it became the beginning of his downfall. Reports surfaced. Hazard arrived overweight, unfit, unprepared. The same player who once danced through defenses with ease suddenly looked sluggish, slow, detached. And then came the injuries, one after another, breaking his rhythm, breaking his confidence, breaking the very foundation of his game. But was it just bad luck? Or was this the consequence of years of neglect, of a player who never pushed his body to the absolute limit? Some say it was never meant to work. That Hazard was never built for a club like Real Madrid. That he fooled everyone into believing he was the next Galactico, when, in reality, he was never that player to begin with. But is that really fair? Can a player who dominated the Premier League for nearly a decade suddenly just lose everything? Or was there something happening behind the scenes that we never saw? Because if you think you know Eden Hazard's story, wait until you see what really happened. Eden Hazard's story begins not in the stadiums of roaring crowds. but in the quiet, forgotten streets of La Louvière, Belgium. There, a young boy dribbled tirelessly, weaving through imaginary defenders, his feet moving with a rhythm that no one had taught him. It was as if the ball was part of him, responding to his touch like an artist's brush on a canvas. He was different, not just gifted, born for this. By the time he stepped onto Lille's training ground, whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs into roars. Scouts from Europe's biggest clubs came to witness the prodigy. They left in disbelief. This kid wasn't just good, he was something else. His dribbling was effortless, almost arrogant, as if gravity had no hold on him. Defenders lunged, desperate to stop him, but he danced past them, untouched. He didn't just beat opponents, he humiliated them. At 17, he was already controlling games, dictating tempo, bending reality with the ball at his feet. He played without fear, without hesitation. He didn't need to check his surroundings, he knew. His first touch was velvet, his acceleration explosive. Everything about him screamed greatness. But beneath the magic, a subtle warning sign lingered, something that no one dared to question back then. Talent was never his problem. But what about hunger? What about sacrifice? Even in France, where he tore through Ligue 1, winning back-to-back Player of the Year awards, before turning 21, there were clues. He rarely trained beyond what was required. He never obsessed over his body like the greats before him. He relied on instinct, on pure, untamed brilliance. And in League One, that was enough. But then came Chelsea. Hazard didn't arrive at Stamford Bridge quietly. No scripted interviews, no rehearsed lines, just a single tweet. "I'm signing for the Champions League winner." The confidence of a king, stepping into his new kingdom. And from the moment he touched the ball in blue, something was clear. This wasn't just a promising talent. This was a superstar. The Premier League should have slowed him down. It should have been a challenge. But instead, it became his playground. Defenders who once looked invincible were reduced to mere obstacles in his path. He moved like a phantom. Impossible to track, impossible to touch. His dribbling wasn't flashy, it was surgical. Every movement, every feint, every touch had a purpose. Chelsea had seen legends before, but Hazard was different. His impact was immediate. In his first season, he registered 13 goals and 24 assists, instantly establishing himself as the most dangerous player in England. He didn't just win games, he owned them, and he did it effortlessly. The comparisons came fast. Messi, Ronaldo, could he be next? Could he reach their level? His dribbling stats rivaled Messi's. His ability to change a game with a single run was reminiscent of the best. The world started to believe, but there was always that one question. Messi and Ronaldo weren't just great, they were obsessed. They spent every waking moment refining their craft, pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. They weren't just chasing greatness, they were at war with it. But Hazard? He loved football, but did he need it the way they did? Did he crave it with the same hunger, the same desperation? At Chelsea, it didn't matter, because even without that relentless drive, he was that good. A one-man wrecking crew, a force of nature that turned defense into attack in the blink of an eye. He won 2 Premier League titles, lifted the Europa League trophy, and claimed the PFA Player of the Year award in 2015. He had it all. He was Chelsea's king. And then, 2019 arrived. Real Madrid came calling. And when Real Madrid calls, you don't say no. It was the transfer that felt destined. The moment where Hazard would finally step onto football's biggest stage and prove, once and for all, that he belonged among the gods. But fairy tales don't always have happy endings. Hazard arrived in Madrid with the world at his feet. He was supposed to be the face of a new Galactico era, the man to replace Cristiano Ronaldo, to lead Madrid into a new dynasty. But from day one, something felt off. The sharpness wasn't there. The explosiveness, the arrogance. Then came the headlines. He had arrived overweight, not by a little, by nearly 10 kilograms. Spanish media doesn't forgive. They don't forget. The criticism was immediate, ruthless, and suddenly, the first cracks in the illusion began to show. The season started. Something was wrong. The same player who once glided past defenders effortlessly now looked slow, hesitant. Then came the first injury. Then another. Then another. The rhythm was gone. The magic was fading. The questions were growing louder. What happened to Eden Hazard? Was it the pressure? The weight of expectation? Or had he always been a player who could shine only when the environment was perfect for him? The world was starting to see something that no one wanted to believe. And what comes next? What comes next will change everything. Eden Hazard was Chelsea's golden boy, a magician draped in blue, a player who made fans believe in the impossible. Every time he touched the ball, Stamford Bridge held its breath. He was the player who made grown men leap from their seats, who turned defenders into spectators, who carried Chelsea through moments of crisis with nothing but sheer genius. His goals weren't just goals, they were statements. That solo run against Arsenal, where he shrugged off 1, 2, 3 defenders before casually slotting the ball past the keeper. That thunderbolt against Tottenham, crushing their title dreams. The dribble against West Ham, weaving through bodies like a ghost. These weren't just highlights. They were moments that defined an era. The Premier League had never seen a player like him. But what if I told you that beneath all the brilliance, beneath the trophies, beneath the glory, the decline had already begun? Hazard wasn't just talented. He was effortless. He played with a joy that made football look easy, a natural gift that seemed limitless. But football at the highest level isn't just about talent. It's about dedication, obsession, sacrifice. And that was where the cracks began to show. Unlike Cristiano Ronaldo, who treated his body like a temple, who pushed himself beyond human limits, Hazard never had that hunger. He loved the game, but did he love greatness? Did he crave it with the same intensity as the legends before him? Or was he just a genius who never wanted to suffer for his art? At Chelsea, it didn't seem to matter. He was so good, so untouchable, that he could afford to play football on his terms. He could skip the extra gym sessions. He could avoid the obsessive routines that defined players like Messi and Ronaldo. Even his teammates knew it. He doesn't even stretch, former Chelsea players would say, half in admiration, half in disbelief. It was as if he had hacked football, bending the rules of what was necessary to be world-class. But was this sustainable? Could a player dominate for years without treating his body like a machine? His inconsistency should have been a warning. There were seasons where he was unplayable, where he was hands down the best player in England. But there were also seasons where he disappeared. In 2015-16, after winning the Premier League, his form collapsed. He scored just 4 goals in the entire season. Chelsea finished 10th. And for the first time, the world saw a different Hazard. A player who, when things got tough, didn't fight his way back. He coasted. He admitted that he had lost motivation. He even said, after winning the title, "I just wanted to enjoy my summer." These weren't the words of a player obsessed with dominance. These were the words of a player who played for joy, not for legacy. And then came the most revealing comment of all. Hazard, in his own words, "I don't like training." Let that sink in. A player who was being compared to Messi and Ronaldo openly admitted that he didn't like to train, that he didn't push himself beyond what was required, that he didn't chase perfection the way others did. Imagine if Ronaldo had said that. Imagine if Messi had confessed to not caring about the grind. It would be unthinkable. But with Hazard, it was brushed aside. because when he was in the mood, he was unstoppable. And when he wasn't, he simply waited for his talent to do the work. But talent alone never beats time. No one stays young forever. And while Messi and Ronaldo were fine-tuning their bodies, preparing for the inevitable decline, Hazard was relying on something that wouldn't last forever. He was ignoring the warning signs. And the most dangerous part? No one around him seemed to challenge him. No one forced him to take things seriously, because he was so good, so naturally gifted, that Chelsea let him operate on his own terms. And why wouldn't they? When he turned it on, he was the best player in the country. But what if I told you that Madrid didn't just buy the Hazard of 2019? What if I told you they bought a player who had already started to slow down? His final season at Chelsea was magical. He dragged them to a Europa League title. He was the best player in England once again, and he left on top. But if you watched closely, you could see it. The explosiveness was fading. He wasn't sprinting as much. He wasn't taking players on with the same ferocity. His dribbling was still elite, but the gap between him and the defenders wasn't as wide as before. The Premier League is unforgiving, but so was time. And Hazard, whether he realized it or not, was already starting to lose his edge. Real Madrid didn't just buy a superstar. They bought a superstar with years of wear and tear. A player who had never prioritized his body. A player who was moving into the most demanding club in the world without the same level of preparation as those before him. He thought he could get by on talent alone. He thought Madrid would be just like Chelsea, a place where he could play freely, where he could let his instincts take over. But Real Madrid is different. It is a club where only the ruthless survive, where pressure doesn't just exist, it consumes you. And from the moment he stepped onto that stage, the moment he put on that iconic white jersey, the illusion started to crack. Because Madrid doesn't wait. Madrid doesn't forgive. And for the first time in his career, Hazard was about to face something he had never experienced before. The feeling of being completely, utterly lost. If you think Hazard's lazy attitude was bad, just wait until you see how it affected his time at Madrid. Because what happened next? What happened next wasn't just failure. It was one of the most spectacular implosions football has ever seen. Eden Hazard's transfer to Real Madrid was supposed to be the moment everything changed. The culmination of years of brilliance, the long-awaited transition from Premier League icon to Galactico legend. The club had spent years searching for Cristiano Ronaldo's true successor, and in Hazard, they believed they had finally found him. A €100 million signing. A statement to the world that Madrid was ready to reclaim its throne. The fans were ecstatic. The media called it the perfect move. Hazard himself called it his dream transfer. But behind the cameras, behind the dazzling press conference, something wasn't right. And from the very first moment, the illusion began to crack. The day Hazard arrived in Madrid, the excitement was palpable. Thousands of fans gathered at the Santiago Bernabéu, ready to witness their new superstar. The club had staged this moment perfectly. The cameras were rolling, the banners were waving, and then Hazard stepped onto the pitch. And in that instant, the whispers began. Something was off. He didn't look like a €100 million signing. He didn't look like the world-class athlete they had been promised. He looked heavier, slower, less sharp, and soon, the whispers turned into headlines. The Spanish press, ruthless as ever, delivered the verdict with brutal honesty. Eden Hazard, their new Galactico, had arrived overweight, not by a little, by nearly 10 kilograms. For a player built on agility, on acceleration, on explosiveness, this was unforgivable. And from that very first moment, the doubts began to creep in. How does a player who just secured the biggest move of his life show up out of shape? How does a man given the responsibility of leading the most demanding club in world football arrive unprepared. The excuses came fast. It was summer weight. He had always gained a little extra in the off-season. He would be fine by the start of the season. But this wasn't Chelsea. This wasn't a club that tolerated anything less than perfection. This was Real Madrid, and Madrid doesn't wait. Zinedine Zidane, the man who had personally wanted Hazard at the club, tried to keep his faith. But as preseason continued, as training sessions revealed a slower, less dynamic player, even he couldn't hide his disappointment. In an uncharacteristically blunt statement, Zidane admitted, "We expected much more from him." It was a message that rang loud and clear. This wasn't the Hazard they had paid for. This wasn't the Hazard they had built their future around. And the worst part, the season hadn't even started yet. But things were about to get much worse. The first few weeks of the season were crucial. This was Hazard's moment to prove that the wait didn't matter, that he could still be the player Madrid had dreamed of. But from the very first match, something was missing. The sharpness, the explosiveness, the confidence. Every time he touched the ball, the anticipation was there, the expectation that he would do something magical. But it never came. His dribbles lacked their usual elegance. His acceleration was slower. His presence on the pitch felt ordinary. And at Real Madrid, ordinary is unacceptable. Then, disaster struck. Just as he was beginning to find his rhythm, just as he seemed ready to silence the critics, Hazard suffered his first major injury in a Madrid shirt. A heavy challenge, a twisted ankle, and suddenly, he was out for weeks. For most players, this would be a setback. For Hazard, it was the beginning of the end. The injury itself wasn't catastrophic, but what followed was a nightmare. His recovery was slow, painfully slow. Reports surfaced that his rehabilitation wasn't going well, that he wasn't pushing himself hard enough in training. And when he finally returned, he was a shadow of his former self. His touches were heavier, his movements stiffer, his confidence shattered. He no longer played like the man who once tore through Premier League defenses with ease. He played like a man who no longer trusted his own body. And just when things couldn't get worse, another injury. And then another. In his first season alone, Hazard missed more games through injury than in his entire Chelsea career. Madrid had signed a superstar, but what they got was a player permanently stuck in recovery. The fans, once ecstatic, began to turn. The same people who had cheered his arrival now watched him with frustration, with disbelief. The Spanish media was merciless. They labeled him a flop, a disappointment, the worst transfer in Madrid's history. And yet, the most painful part wasn't the media, the fans, or even the injuries. It was Hazard himself, because for the first time, he seemed to be questioning himself too. At Chelsea, even when he had bad seasons, even when he wasn't at his best, he always played with a certain joy, a sense of freedom. But at Madrid, that was gone. Every touch was cautious. Every run was hesitant. The sparkle, the arrogance, the confidence that had once defined him, it had disappeared. He was no longer Eden Hazard, the magician, the unstoppable dribbler. He was just another player, another forgotten star in a club that demanded legends. But why? Why did it go so wrong so quickly? Was it the injuries? The pressure? The weight of expectation? Or had Hazard's greatest flaw, the one that had always been there, lurking beneath his brilliance, finally caught up to him? Because if there was one thing that had always separated him from Messi, from Ronaldo, from the legends of the game, it was his mentality. The greats don't just rely on talent. They live for the grind, for the struggle, for the fight. But Hazard, he had never been that kind of player. He had always played on his terms, in his own way, and for years, that had been enough. But at Madrid, it wasn't. At Madrid, you don't get time to adjust. You don't get time to recover. You either perform or you disappear. And Eden Hazard, the man who once made defenders tremble, the man who was supposed to be Real Madrid's next superstar, was disappearing before our very eyes. But what happens next? What happens next is so shocking that even Madrid fans couldn't believe it. Because if you thought this was the lowest point of Hazard's career, if you thought things couldn't possibly get worse, just wait. Because the real nightmare was only just beginning. Eden Hazard's dream move to Real Madrid had already begun to unravel. The weight issues, the slow adaptation, the lack of impact in his first games, all of it had planted the first seeds of doubt. But even the harshest critics couldn't have predicted what came next. Because if Hazard's struggles in Madrid started with fitness problems, they quickly turned into something far worse. His body, once so agile, so resilient, so untouchable, now betrayed him at every turn. One injury after another, one setback leading to the next. And with each passing game, with each missed minute, the inevitable question grew louder. Was this just bad luck? Or had Hazard's past finally caught up with him? It started with an ankle injury, a heavy challenge, a twisted joint, a minor setback. At least that's what they said at first. But the recovery dragged on. Weeks turned into months. And when he finally returned, he wasn't the same. The explosiveness wasn't there. The effortless dribbling, the quick changes of direction that once defined him, they were gone. His movements looked hesitant, almost fearful, as if he no longer trusted his own body. And just when he started to regain some confidence, it happened again. Another injury, then another. By the end of his first season, Hazard had spent more time in the medical room than on the pitch. Madrid had signed him to replace Cristiano Ronaldo, to lead the attack, to be the face of a new era. But instead, they had a superstar who seemed permanently stuck in recovery. The Spanish media was relentless. The fans grew restless. And inside the club, whispers of frustration turned into outright concern. This wasn't normal. Players get injured. It's part of the game. But this was something else. Something deeper. Hazard's body wasn't responding the way it should. His injuries weren't just taking him out of games. They were changing him as a player, slowing him down, dulling his instincts, turning a magician into a liability. Madrid had seen legends fall before. They had watched great players break down under pressure. But this wasn't pressure. This was something they didn't know how to fix. For comparison, look at Ronaldo Fenomeno, a man who suffered two of the worst knee injuries football has ever seen. Injuries that should have ended his career. But he came back. He adapted. He changed his game, adjusted his style, and still won a World Cup. Neymar, another player who has battled injuries his entire career, still finds ways to reinvent himself. Even Messi, who struggled with persistent hamstring problems early on, reshaped his training regimen to overcome them. But Hazard, he never adapted. He never evolved. He never found a way to rebuild himself after each setback. And that was the difference. Because Madrid wasn't just losing a player to injuries. They were losing a player who didn't seem capable of fighting his way back. Medical experts studied his case. Specialists were brought in to analyze his physical condition. And the results were alarming. His ankle, the same one injured early in his Madrid career, had never fully healed. Scar tissue, weakened ligaments, reduced mobility. It was as if his body had aged years overnight. Every recovery took longer than expected. Every return to the pitch was followed by a relapse. This wasn't just a series of unfortunate events. This was systemic. And that led to the biggest question of all. Was this all just bad luck? Or had Hazard's past decisions finally caught up to him? Because for years, he had relied on talent alone. He had never been obsessed with fitness. Never been the type to spend extra hours in the gym, to push his body to the absolute limit like Cristiano Ronaldo. At Chelsea, he got away with it. His natural ability was enough. His body recovered quickly. But now, He was in a league that demanded everything from its players, a club that tolerated nothing less than perfection. And suddenly, the habits that he had ignored for so long, the conditioning he had never prioritized, were costing him everything. Madrid's frustration boiled over. They had spent a fortune on him. They had given him time, given him patience. But patience runs out, and so they tried to fix him. They tried everything. They brought in specialized trainers, adjusted his rehabilitation programs, worked on strengthening his ankle, altering his running mechanics, modifying his diet. They pushed him harder, demanded more, hoping that somewhere inside him was the player they had once seen dominate the Premier League. But it didn't work. His body wouldn't cooperate. Every time it seemed like he was close to a comeback, another problem emerged. And every time he stepped back onto the pitch, he looked further and further away from the player he used to be. The statistics were damning. By the end of his second season, Hazard had missed more games for Madrid than he had played. He had contributed almost nothing. His highlight reels, once filled with mesmerizing dribbles and spectacular goals, had been replaced with injury reports and footage of him limping off the field. The fans had lost hope. The media had turned on him completely, and inside the club, the realization set in. This wasn't just a rough patch. This wasn't just an injury crisis. This was a failed experiment. And the worst part, it wasn't over yet, because what happens next isn't just about injuries. It isn't just about a player losing his battle with fitness. It's about something far more painful, because Madrid didn't just lose patience. They gave up. They abandoned the dream. And what they did next proved that even they had stopped believing in Eden Hazard. Because if you thought this was the worst part of his story, if you thought his time in Madrid couldn't possibly get more humiliating, you haven't seen what's coming. Because the final chapter of Hazard's Real Madrid nightmare, that's where everything truly falls apart. Eden Hazard's time at Real Madrid was no longer a disappointment. It was a disaster. The excitement of his arrival had faded into frustration, then into anger, and now into something worse. Indifference. The fans, who once filled the Santiago Bernabéu with chants of his name, had stopped believing. The media, who once hailed him as the heir to Cristiano Ronaldo, now mocked him. And inside the club, where patience had already run out, there was only one question left to ask. Was this the worst signing in Real Madrid's history? Madrid had seen bad transfers before. Big names who arrived with high expectations, but never delivered. Kaká, a Ballon d'Or winner, never fully adapted and struggled with injuries. But at least he had moments of brilliance. James Rodriguez, after an explosive World Cup, had faded, but he still contributed in key moments. Gareth Bale, despite his infamous clashes with the club, had won them Champions League titles. Even Luka Jovic, one of the most disappointing signings in recent years, had cost a fraction of what Hazard did. But Hazard was different, because he wasn't just failing. He was non-existent. The numbers told a humiliating story. Over 3 seasons, Hazard had played fewer than 100 games. He had scored fewer goals in 3 years than some midfielders did in a single season. His assists were almost non-existent. And when you broke it down, the reality was even worse. The club had paid over 100 million euros for him, plus wages, bonuses, and agent fees. That meant every time Hazard stepped onto the pitch, every minute he played, had cost Madrid more money than any player in their history. A financial disaster, a sporting catastrophe, and for the fans, an insult. And then came the moment everything truly collapsed. It wasn't an injury. It wasn't a poor performance. It was a smile, a single, careless moment that turned frustration into fury. April 2021. Real Madrid had just been eliminated from the Champions League by Chelsea. A brutal, humiliating defeat. The entire squad was devastated. Faces of frustration, anger, players walking off the pitch in silence. Except for one man, Hazard. Instead of mourning the defeat, instead of walking off with his teammates, he was laughing, joking, hugging his former Chelsea teammates like nothing had happened. And the cameras caught it all. The image was everywhere. Spanish media erupted. The fans had had enough. And the next time Hazard stepped onto the Bernabeu pitch, he heard the words no footballer ever wants to hear from their own supporters. Hazard, Vitya. Hazard, get out. At that moment, his fate was sealed. The last thread of faith Madrid had in him was gone. He wasn't just a failed signing. He was an outcast, an unwanted passenger in a club that had already moved on. Because by then, Madrid had stopped waiting. Vinicius Jr. had exploded into stardom. Young, hungry, electrifying. Everything they had once hoped Hazard would be. And as Vini soared, Hazard faded further into the shadows. His minutes disappeared, his role diminished, and eventually, he wasn't even a player anymore. Just a name on the payroll, a reminder of a mistake the club wanted to forget. But was it really all Hazard's fault? Was he simply the victim of injuries? Or was this the price of years of neglect, years of relying on talent without discipline? Because if there's one thing football has always proven, it's that talent alone is never enough. And for Hazard, Madrid was the place where that truth finally caught up with him. But what happened next? What happened next wasn't just another failure. It was humiliation on a level no one saw coming. Because if you thought this was bad, wait until you see how Madrid finally decided to get rid of Eden Hazard. What they did next will make you furious. Eden Hazard's fall from grace at Real Madrid had been painful to watch. But up until this point, there was still a sliver of hope. Some believed he could turn it around, that the injuries would stop, that the flashes of brilliance would return, that maybe, just maybe, he could still salvage his legacy. But all of that changed in a single moment, a moment that sealed his fate, not just with the fans, not just with the club, but with football itself. And the most shocking part, it wasn't an injury. It wasn't a humiliating defeat. It wasn't a poor performance. It was a smile, a single careless smile that turned frustration into fury and made the world realize that Eden Hazard's time at Real Madrid was over. April 2021, the Champions League semifinals, Real Madrid against Chelsea. For Hazard, this was supposed to be a defining moment, a chance to prove to the world that he was still capable of greatness, that Madrid hadn't wasted their faith in him, that he was more than just an expensive mistake. But the game told a different story. Madrid were dominated. Chelsea were faster, sharper, stronger. And Hazard? He was invisible, a ghost on the pitch, outclassed by the very players who had once been his teammates. He had been brought to Madrid for nights like this, to be decisive, to be the difference. But instead, he watched as Chelsea eliminated Real Madrid, securing their spot in the Champions League final. And as the final whistle blew, the Madrid players walked off, heads down, devastated. But Hazard was different. The camera zoomed in on him, expecting to capture a moment of disappointment, frustration, maybe even anger. Instead, they captured something else. Hazard laughing, joking, hugging his former Chelsea teammates as if nothing had happened. The man Madrid had paid 100 million euros for, the man who was supposed to carry them to glory, was standing there, laughing minutes after his team had been knocked out of the Champions League. And in that moment, something broke, not just in the fans watching at home, not just in the Madrid dressing room, but across all of Spanish football. The backlash was immediate. The image of Hazard smiling after such a humiliating defeat spread like wildfire. Spanish media exploded. Headlines were ruthless. Hazard is laughing at Madrid, the biggest embarrassment in Real Madrid history. He doesn't care. The club tried to contain the damage, but it was too late. The fans had made up their minds. The betrayal was complete. And at the next game at the Santiago Bernabeu, the verdict came loud and clear. The boos rained down. Hazard, Vitya. Hazard, get out. For Madridistas, it wasn't just about his poor performances anymore. It wasn't just about the injuries, the weight issues, the lack of goals. It was about something deeper: respect, commitment, honor. They had defended him for years, waited for him to prove them right. But after that moment, after that smile, there was no coming back. It was over. The dressing room felt it too. Inside the club, there had already been doubts. But now, even his own teammates started to distance themselves. The respect was gone. And without respect, there was no future. But the real question remained. Had Hazard ever truly cared? Did he ever really feel the pressure of playing for Real Madrid? Or was he always just a passenger, content with whatever happened, win or lose? Because if there was one thing that moment proved, it was that he wasn't suffering. He wasn't tormented by his failures the way legends are. He wasn't haunted by missed opportunities. He wasn't devastated by Madrid's downfall. He was just there. And in a club where only the obsessed survive, that was unforgivable. But if you thought this was rock bottom, if you thought Hazard's story couldn't possibly get more humiliating, you're wrong. Because what happens next will shock you even more. Real Madrid had had enough, and their plan to get rid of him, it was unlike anything the club had ever done before. Eden Hazard had gone from being the most expensive signing in Real Madrid's history to something far worse. Irrelevant, not just a disappointment, not just an injury-prone star who had failed to deliver. He had become invisible, a ghost at the club, a name on the squad list that no longer mattered. He wasn't even a problem anymore. He was an afterthought, the ultimate humiliation for a player who was once considered one of the best in the world. There was no dramatic farewell, no final chance to redeem himself, no emotional goodbye, just silence, as if he had never really been there at all. At first, there was still hope. When the 2021-22 season began, Madrid fans wondered if there was anything left of the player they had once admired. Could he finally stay fit? Could he reinvent himself? Could he prove, even if only for a moment, that he wasn't just another failed Galactico? But the answers came quickly, and they were brutal, because Hazard didn't just struggle for form. He wasn't just below expectations. He was completely ignored, passed over for younger players, for hungrier players, for players who weren't even close to his talent, but had something he didn't: fire. Carlo Ancelotti, a coach known for his man management, tried to be diplomatic at first. He had seen legendary players struggle before. He had worked with superstars at the peak of their careers, but he had also seen what happened when that magic faded. He knew how to manage egos, how to handle fading legends. But the truth couldn't be hidden forever. When asked about Hazard's role in the team, his response was as cold as it was definitive. "I'm not here to give minutes to players just for the sake of it." No excuses, no sympathy, no second chances. Ancelotti had made up his mind. Hazard wasn't part of Madrid's future. And if there was ever a moment that confirmed how low he had fallen, it was this. A €100 million signing. The man once expected to replace Cristiano Ronaldo, now sitting behind fringe players, young prospects, rotation players, names that weren't even recognized outside of Spain. These were the players getting minutes over Hazard. And he sat there, game after game, watching, forgotten. For Madrid, the project had moved on. Vinicius Jr. had become a superstar. Rodrigo was rising. Federico Valverde was proving his worth. The attack no longer needed Hazard. And worst of all, no one at the club seemed to care. The coaching staff had stopped waiting for a miracle. The fans had stopped asking why he wasn't playing. Even the media, once obsessed with his downfall, had moved on to the next big story. Hazard had become the one thing no footballer ever wants to be: irrelevant. But what was going through his mind? Did he even want to fight for his place anymore? Did he still believe he could make an impact? Or had he already accepted that his Madrid career was over? Because that's what it looked like. There were no outbursts, no demands for more playing time, no reinvention, no transformation, no desperation to prove people wrong. Just quiet acceptance. A man watching his career slip away, doing nothing to stop it. And then came the final humiliation. The season was winding down, and Madrid had already secured the league title. It was the perfect opportunity to rotate the squad, to give players like Hazard some game time. But even then, he remained on the bench. Even when Madrid had nothing to lose, even when the games didn't matter, Ancelotti still didn't call his name. A statement louder than any words. He was no longer just out of the starting lineup. He was out of the conversation. He wasn't even included in tactical discussions. There were games where his name wasn't even mentioned. No pre-match speculation about whether he would start. No post-match debates about his performance. He had become invisible. It wasn't supposed to be like this. When he had arrived, he was supposed to be Madrid's new hero. He was supposed to bring back the magic. He had dreamed of wearing the white shirt, imagined himself lifting the Champions League trophy, scoring the winning goal in El Clasico. But the dream had turned into something else entirely. He had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when talent isn't enough. In training, the signs were obvious. The intensity wasn't there. He was no longer even considered part of the core squad. He had become an outsider. Teammates who once looked up to him as a superstar now saw him as a reminder of wasted potential. His name was still on the squad list, but in reality, he was no longer part of the team. He was there in body, but not in spirit. He knew it. Everyone knew it. And then came the whispers. Was he going to leave? Would Madrid find a way to get rid of him? Fans speculated. The media analyzed every transfer window. But the truth was, no club in the world was willing to take on his salary. No club was willing to bet on a player who had lost everything that made him special. And this is where I ask you, was this the worst downfall in football history? Because we have seen legends decline before. We have seen great players lose their place. But a player of Hazard's caliber, a 100 million euros signing, going from world class to completely irrelevant, this is something different. This is something we may never see again. And yet, the story doesn't end here. Because what happened after he left Madrid? What happened when Hazard finally walked away? That is something no one could have predicted. And trust me, you are not ready for what comes next. Eden Hazard's departure from Real Madrid should have been a new beginning, a fresh start, a second chance to rewrite his story. For a player of his caliber, the football world should have been watching, waiting, fighting for his signature. The transfer market usually reacts when a name this big becomes available. Even fading stars still command attention, still attract last-minute negotiations, still get one final shot at redemption. But with Hazard, nothing. No bidding wars. No urgent calls from Europe's elite. No offers from clubs desperate to revive a fallen genius. Just silence. And that silence was more deafening than any criticism he had ever faced before. Because this wasn't just Real Madrid giving up on him. It was football itself turning the page. At first, the rumors swirled. Maybe he would return to Chelsea. It made sense. Stamford Bridge was where he was loved, the place where he was a king, where fans still spoke his name with reverence, where he had once dominated English football with an ease that felt almost unfair. But Chelsea had changed. The club had moved on. The team had been rebuilt with younger, faster, hungrier players. The Premier League had evolved. becoming even more physically demanding, even less forgiving. Could Hazard still handle that pace, that intensity? The answer, deep down, was clear, and as quickly as the rumors started, they died. Chelsea didn't want him back. Then came the whispers of a move to Major League Soccer, the United States, where aging superstars go for one last payday, one last chance to shine in a less demanding environment. It should have been the perfect escape, the perfect way for Hazard to rediscover his love for the game, to play without pressure, to enjoy football again. But even there, the excitement wasn't real. No club was willing to break the bank for him. No franchise was lining up to make him their marquee player. He was a luxury they weren't willing to afford, a gamble they weren't willing to take. And that was the real shock. Hazard wasn't just being passed over by elite clubs. He was being ignored by leagues that historically welcomed fading stars with open arms. How did it come to this? How does a player who was once considered a future Ballon d'Or winner become unwanted overnight? Was it the injuries? The lack of fitness? The image of a player who had lost his hunger? The truth is, it was all of it. Football is ruthless. Clubs don't live in the past. Fans may cherish memories, but teams invest in the future, in youth, in hunger, in players who fight for every ball, who push themselves beyond their limits. And Hazard, fair or not, he had become a symbol of wasted potential, a reminder of what happens when talent alone isn't enough. And that's when the comparisons started again. Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, players who had faced adversity, who had aged, who had suffered, but who had refused to fade away. Players who adapted, who reinvented themselves, who fought against time itself. They weren't just talented, they were obsessed. They lived and breathed football, sacrificing everything to remain at the top. If Hazard had even a fraction of that mentality, could he have stayed among the greats? Could he have been remembered as one of the defining players of his generation? Because physically he had it all. The vision, the dribbling, the balance, the intelligence, his ability to glide past defenders, to turn games with a moment of magic, to make football look effortless. These were gifts few players in history have possessed. But football isn't just about talent. It's about obsession. And if there's one thing Hazard never was, it was obsessed. He loved the game, but he didn't live for it. And now, for the first time in his life, football had moved on without him. No more Champions League nights under the lights. No more roaring crowds waiting for his magic. No more defenders trembling when he picked up the ball. Just silence. Just uncertainty. Just the realization that the sport that had once revolved around him no longer had a place for him. There were other rumors, of course. Maybe a return to Belgium, where it all started. A fairy tale ending. A final dance with the club that made him. But even that never materialized. Hazard wasn't interested in a sentimental farewell. He had nothing left to prove there. And maybe, deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't the same player anymore. And Europe knew it too. There were no desperate managers calling his agent. No last-ditch efforts to convince him to take a pay cut for one more shot at glory. The football world had collectively decided that Hazard was no longer worth the risk. And yet, there was still one last question hanging over his legacy. If he had approached football with a different mindset, could he have been remembered alongside the greatest of all time? If he had trained like Cristiano Ronaldo, if he had treated every match as a battle, if he had built his career on obsession rather than talent alone, would he have lifted a Ballon d'Or? Would he have dominated the game for over a decade instead of just a few years? That question will never have an answer, but it lingers, because football has always been about more than just skill. It's about mentality, and Hazard, for all his brilliance, never had the ruthless hunger that defines legends. And so, football moved on. The game that once adored him, that once feared him, had left him behind. No farewell tour, no grand exit, just an ending that felt incomplete. And what happens next? What happens next will make you question everything about modern football. If a player like Hazard can disappear this easily, what does that say about the sport? About the system? About how quickly the game forgets? You're about to find out. October 2023. The news sent shockwaves through the football world. Eden Hazard, at just 32 years old, was retiring from professional football. No farewell season. No emotional goodbye in front of thousands of fans. No attempt to fight his way back. Just a quiet, almost surreal announcement. A career that once seemed destined for immortality was over. The reaction was immediate. Disbelief, confusion, frustration. How could a player who had been one of the most electrifying talents of his generation simply walk away at an age when so many others were still dominating? How could someone who had spent years being compared to Messi and Ronaldo choose to fade into the background so easily? But perhaps the real question wasn't why he retired. It was whether this had been inevitable all along. For years, Hazard's story had been a battle between raw talent and mentality. He was never the obsessive type, never the player who needed football to breathe, to survive. He played because he enjoyed it, because it was fun, because it came effortlessly to him. But football at the highest level isn't just about talent. It's about obsession. It's about those who wake up thinking about the game, who push their bodies to the limit, who train with relentless discipline, treating every match like life or death. Cristiano Ronaldo, at 38, still sculpting his body like a machine, still chasing records. Lionel Messi, at 36, still controlling games at the highest level. Even Luka Modric, Hazard's former teammate at Real Madrid, dictating Champions League matches at nearly 38 years old. Yet here was Hazard, 6 years younger, saying goodbye. And that was what made his retirement so shocking. Not just the timing, but the way it confirmed what many had feared for years, that maybe deep down he had never truly needed football the way the greats do. That maybe when the injuries piled up, when the criticism became relentless, when the fire was no longer there, walking away wasn't a struggle for him. It was a relief. When he left Real Madrid, the writing was already on the wall. No club came knocking. No team desperately tried to bring him in. He had offers, lesser ones, from smaller leagues, from teams willing to take the risk on his name alone. But Hazard didn't want that. He didn't want to fight his way back. He didn't want to rebuild, prove people wrong, show that there was still something left in him. And in that decision, he did something almost unheard of in modern football. He walked away on his own terms. And that's what makes him such an enigma. Because the truth is, he could have kept going. If he had wanted to, he could have played for another 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. Could he have returned to Belgium for a farewell season with his boyhood club? Yes. Could he have gone to MLS and become a marquee signing, playing in front of huge crowds every weekend? Absolutely. Could he have followed the new wave of footballers moving to Saudi Arabia for one last massive payday? Without a doubt. But he didn't, because for Hazard, football was never a war. It was never about proving himself over and over again. It was about joy, and once that joy was gone, so was he. Some saw his decision as admirable. A player who refused to drag out his career, who chose to leave on his own terms rather than chase one last payday. Others saw it as a waste. A player who had everything to be a legend, but who, when faced with adversity, simply gave up. Either way, it was impossible to ignore the contrast between him and the legends who refused to let go. Zlatan Ibrahimovic played until he was nearly 42, defying logic and injuries, refusing to quit. Ronaldo, Messi, Benzema, players who had already won everything, yet still searching for more. Hazard, he had won league titles in France, England, and Spain. He had lifted a Europa League trophy, a Champions League trophy, and led Belgium's golden generation to their greatest finish in a World Cup. In his mind, he had done enough. There was nothing left to chase. But maybe the saddest part of all was how quickly football moved on. There were tributes, of course, messages from former teammates, from clubs, from the Belgian national team, thanking him for the memories. But there was no farewell match, no emotional send-off in front of thousands of adoring fans, no final goal, no last applause as he walked off the pitch one final time. He just disappeared. And within weeks, the football world had moved on. New stars were emerging. New names were taking over. The game had no time to dwell on Hazard's exit, and that, more than anything, was the greatest sign of how much had changed. Because it wasn't supposed to end like this. When he was at Chelsea, when he was dancing past defenders in the Premier League, when he was making the impossible look easy, nobody thought his career would just fizzle out. Nobody thought he would be done by 32. But now, looking back, maybe the signs were always there. The lack of discipline, the refusal to take training seriously, the belief that talent alone would always be enough. And for a long time it was, until it wasn't. And now the question remains, was his retirement too early, or was it always inevitable? Because football has always been about more than just skill. It's about mentality. And Hazard, for all his brilliance, never had the ruthless hunger that defines legends. And so football moved on. The game that once adored him, that once feared him, had left him behind. No farewell tour, no grand exit, just an ending that felt incomplete. But if you think this is the end of Hazard's story, you're mistaken. Because the most shocking part is yet to come. And what happens next? That is something no one saw coming. What if everything had been different? What if Eden Hazard had taken football as seriously as Cristiano Ronaldo? If he had treated every training session like a final? If he had lived and breathed the game with an obsessive hunger? If he had pushed his body to its absolute limit every single day? Would we be talking about him in the same breath as Messi and Ronaldo? Would he have lifted a Ballon d'Or? Maybe even multiple? These are the questions that haunt football fans. Because for all of Hazard's undeniable talent, for all the moments of magic, the dribbles, the goals, the impossible plays that made him seem like a genius, there was always something missing. And now, with his career over, all we are left with is the thought of what could have been. Imagine a different version of Hazard. A version that didn't just rely on natural talent, but treated football as an obsession. Picture it, Hazard at 16, already dazzling at Lille, but instead of coasting through training, he stays behind. He practices his finishing relentlessly, sharpens his weaker foot, pushes his fitness to the extreme. While others rest, he studies the greats, absorbing everything. How they train, how they recover, how they dominate. He watches Ronaldo, not just admiring his skills, but dissecting his mentality. He understands that being great isn't enough. To be truly legendary, he must be relentless. He doesn't just rely on his dribbling ability. He works tirelessly to improve every aspect of his game. He develops a killer instinct in front of goal, refines his passing to perfection, ensures that every movement on the pitch is calculated and devastating. By the time he reaches Chelsea, he isn't just the most gifted player in England. He is the most driven. The Hazard in this reality doesn't joke about disliking training. He demands more from himself. He doesn't take summers off. He spends them transforming his body, building explosive power, ensuring that when the season starts, he isn't just good, he is unstoppable. The 2014-15 season, it isn't just a Premier League title. It's a historic campaign with 30-plus goals, a dominant Champions League run, and a Ballon d'Or nomination. The world starts to realize that Hazard isn't just a magician. He is a force of nature. Every game is a spectacle. Defenders don't just struggle to stop him. They fear him. He isn't just entertaining, he is ruthless. He doesn't just dribble past opponents, he punishes them. He doesn't disappear in tough moments, he rises above them. By the time Real Madrid comes calling, they aren't just signing a star. They are signing the best player in the world. He arrives at the Santiago Bernabeu as a man on a mission. He doesn't show up overweight. He doesn't joke about eating too much during the summer. He arrives in peak condition, prepared to carry the most prestigious club in the world on his shoulders. His debut season isn't filled with injuries and inconsistency, it's legendary. He fills the void left by Ronaldo, delivers in every big game, silences the doubters with performances that cement his place among the Galacticos. El Clásicos, Champions League nights, crucial title deciders. He is the difference maker, the one who steps up when it matters most. Instead of fading into the background, he becomes the face of a new era. And instead of retiring at 32, he is still at the top, still feared, still rewriting history. But that's not what happened. Because in the real world, football doesn't reward potential. It rewards those who are willing to suffer for greatness. It rewards those who sacrifice, who push themselves beyond the limits of pain and exhaustion. Hazard, for all his magic, was never willing to suffer. He never embraced the obsession, never embraced the pain, never embraced the sacrifices that separate the great from the truly legendary. And that's why, despite all his brilliance, he never reached the level that his talent alone should have taken him to. And maybe, just maybe, this was always his destiny. Because what if I told you that Hazard's failure was predictable years before he even joined Real Madrid? The pressure was always there. From the moment Eden Hazard was hailed as the heir to Messi and Ronaldo, as the player destined to dominate the next generation, the weight of expectation followed him everywhere. At Chelsea, he was adored, untouchable, free to express himself without the suffocating demand for perfection. But the moment he stepped into Madrid, everything changed. In Spain, the media didn't just critique performances, they dismantled reputations. Every touch, every decision, every mistake was analyzed with ruthless precision. One bad game became a crisis. One injury became a sign of weakness. One careless comment became a national headline. And Hazard, a player who had always played with joy, was suddenly trapped in a cycle of scrutiny, doubt, and relentless pressure. But was it the media that broke him? Or was it just an excuse for a decline that had already begun? Madrid is not a club for second chances. You either deliver, or you are discarded. And from the moment Hazard arrived overweight in his first preseason, the knives were out. The Spanish press, brutal and unforgiving, saw it as a sign of disrespect. How could a €100 million signing, a supposed world-class player, show up in less than peak condition? The headlines were merciless. Hazard disappoints before even playing a match. The criticism wasn't just about his fitness, it was about his attitude. Unlike England, where fans and pundits admired his natural style and shrugged off his lack of obsession with training, Spain demanded more. They demanded intensity, commitment, and an unbreakable mentality. Hazard wasn't just expected to be good. He was expected to be Madrid's leader, the man who would replace Cristiano Ronaldo, the player who would restore Madrid to European dominance. At Chelsea, he had been the main man, but the environment was forgiving. He could afford to go missing in a few games because his moments of brilliance were enough to erase any doubts. The Premier League press, while critical, always seemed to view him as an artist, someone who played football the way it was meant to be played. But in Madrid, the expectations were different. A dribble wasn't enough. A few moments of magic didn't justify inconsistency. The fans and the media demanded dominance every single match. And when that didn't happen, the backlash was immediate. As the injuries started piling up, so did the skepticism. Every recovery took longer than expected. Every return felt like a false dawn. The Spanish press, fueled by frustration, began questioning whether Hazard even cared about football. Does he have the hunger to be great? Does he even love the game? These were the narratives being pushed, not just by journalists, but by former players, coaches, and even some within the Madrid dressing room. The whispers became louder. The comparisons became crueler. Bale at least delivered trophies before he stopped caring. What has Hazard done? And then, the moment that defined his relationship with the Madrid media, the infamous smile. Chelsea had just eliminated Real Madrid from the Champions League, and instead of showing anger, frustration, or disappointment, Hazard was seen laughing with his former Chelsea teammates. A harmless moment? Perhaps. But in Spain, it was an unforgivable crime. The backlash was immediate. He doesn't care. Get him out of Madrid. The next day, his face was on every newspaper. Talk shows dissected his body language, his attitude, his commitment. Madridistas, already frustrated by years of underwhelming performances, turned against him completely. This wasn't just criticism anymore. This was character assassination. And from that moment on, Hazard's time at Madrid was effectively over. But was the media too harsh? Or was Hazard simply not built for this level of scrutiny? Some players thrive under pressure. Some need it to fuel their greatness. Ronaldo used criticism as motivation. Ibrahimovic turned doubters into believers with his arrogance and self-confidence. Even Messi, who rarely spoke to the media, silenced them with performances that made words irrelevant. But Hazard? He had never been the type to fight against the narrative. He had never been the player to respond to criticism with fire. He played for enjoyment, not for legacy. And when the media turned on him, he didn't fight back. He simply faded away. So was it the media that destroyed Hazard? Or was he always destined to fail in Madrid? Because the truth is, players like him, players who rely on instinct, on joy, on freedom, don't always survive in environments that demand control, precision, and an obsession with greatness. Maybe Hazard's story isn't just about injuries. Maybe it's not just about fitness. Maybe it's about a player who was placed in the wrong era, at the wrong club, with the wrong expectations. Because if you strip away the narratives, if you remove the pressure, if you let him play without judgment, maybe he still could have been one of the greatest. But football doesn't work like that. The modern game isn't kind to players who don't adapt. It doesn't wait for those who aren't prepared to suffer for success. And as the Madrid chapter of Hazard's career came to a humiliating end, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just about the media. This was about a player who was given everything and let it slip away. And the worst part, the way they treated him after his retirement was even more shocking. Because if you thought the criticism stopped once he walked away from football, you're in for a surprise. What happens next will make you see Hazard's downfall in a completely different way. Did Eden Hazard really love football? Or was he simply born with a gift so extraordinary that he never needed to love it to succeed? That is the question that haunts his legacy. Because while some players live and breathe the game, dedicating every waking moment to their craft, Hazard was different. He played with an effortless brilliance, a style that felt as if he was improvising with every touch. But beneath the elegance, beneath the dazzling dribbles and match-winning moments, there was always something missing. An obsession, a hunger, a fire that separated legends from great players. And if you look closely, the signs were always there. His words alone tell a story few wanted to believe. "I don't like training," he admitted, a statement that might sound harmless from a player with his natural ability. But in the world of elite football, it was almost unthinkable. The greats do not just train because they have to. They train because they crave perfection. Cristiano Ronaldo, a man who turned himself into a machine through sheer discipline. would famously arrive first and leave last, relentlessly refining every aspect of his game. Lionel Messi, for all his natural talent, spent hours fine-tuning his left foot to a level of precision never seen before. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, obsessed with self-improvement, once said, "Talent is nothing if you don't put in the work." But Hazard, he laughed about skipping the hard work. He didn't obsess over marginal gains. He relied on what he had been given. And for years, it was enough. Until it wasn't. The glimpses of his lack of commitment extended far beyond his words. His lifestyle off the pitch, his habits, his choices, they all painted the picture of a player who never treated football as a relentless pursuit of greatness. Stories emerged of his love for fast food, his relaxed approach to nutrition, his carefree attitude toward physical preparation. Unlike players who saw their bodies as temples, who treated every meal as fuel for performance, Hazard indulged. He played the game as if his talent alone would always carry him, as if the demands of football would never catch up to him. But football does not wait. It does not forgive. And when the physical toll of the sport increased, when injuries became a factor, when the game demanded more than just talent, Hazard found himself unprepared. But maybe the most telling sign of all was the way he responded to setbacks. The greatest players use failure as fuel. When Messi lost a final, he came back stronger. When Ronaldo was doubted, he shattered records. When Ibrahimovic was written off, he reinvented himself. But Hazard, when the criticism intensified, when his body started breaking down, when his performances began to decline, he never seemed desperate to fight back. He never spoke about proving people wrong. He never displayed that raw, obsessive drive to reclaim his place at the top. Instead, he smiled. He joked. He carried himself with the same relaxed demeanor he always had. And maybe that was the problem. Some argue that his approach to football was refreshing, that he played for the love of the game, without the burden of an ego-driven obsession. But at the highest level, that love is rarely enough. The players who dominate do so not just because they enjoy football, but because they fear losing, because they are willing to sacrifice everything to remain at the top. And Hazard, he never played like someone who feared losing at all. And that is exactly what happened. The contrast between him and the relentless winners of his generation became even clearer as the years went on. Luka Modric, at 38, still dictates Champions League games with the same intensity as a decade ago. Robert Lewandowski, well into his 30s, still treats every match as if his career depends on it. Even Karim Benzema, once overshadowed by bigger stars, used his later years to elevate himself into an all-time great. And yet, Hazard, years younger than all of them, was done. Finished. Not because of one devastating injury, not because of some catastrophic decline in skill, but because when the time came to push himself to the absolute limit, he didn't. And that is what separates the great from the legendary. But maybe Hazard never needed football the way others did. Maybe that is the real difference. Players like Ronaldo, Messi, and Ibrahimovic treated the game as a necessity, as something they could not live without. But for Hazard, it was always just a game, something fun, something he was naturally good at. And once the fun was gone, once the challenges outweighed the joy, he walked away without hesitation. No farewell tour, no emotional farewell match, just silence. And that is what makes his story so unique. Because for years, fans believed they were watching a player destined for immortality. But what if he was never meant to be a legend? What if we simply misunderstood him all along? What if Hazard was never chasing greatness, but simply enjoying the ride while it lasted? But before you make your final judgment on his career, there is still one more question to be answered. Because what happens next will change the way you remember Eden Hazard forever. Eden Hazard retired at just 32 years old. In an era where footballers push their bodies beyond their limits, where legends defy time, where Cristiano Ronaldo at 39 is still competing, where Zlatan Ibrahimovic played until 41, and where even players once deemed finished, like Modric, Benzema, and Lewandowski, continue dominating at the highest level, Hazard's decision felt shocking. No farewell match, no final season to prove the doubters wrong, no attempt to find one last dance in a different league. He simply walked away, and that raises the ultimate question. Is there still a way back? Football has seen miracles before. Stories of players rising from the ashes, of careers resurrected when all seemed lost. Ronaldo Fenomeno, after suffering injuries that should have ended him, returned and led Brazil to World Cup glory in 2002. Ibrahimovic, written off time and time again, came back stronger every time. Even Gareth Bale, who seemed more interested in golf than football, delivered when it mattered, scoring in Champions League finals and carrying Wales to historic tournaments. Football loves redemption stories. But could Hazard be next? Could he be the one to prove everyone wrong? Rumors of a comeback have already surfaced. A return to his boyhood club, Lille. An adventure in Major League Soccer, where European stars have found second wins. A move to Saudi Arabia, where players are being handed fortunes to extend their careers. Even whispers of an emotional return to Chelsea, the club where he was loved most. But would any of these really be a comeback? Would playing in a weaker league change how he is remembered? Or would it be nothing more than an afterthought? A footnote in a career that promised so much more? And beyond the speculation, beyond the possibilities, there is one critical question. Does he even want it? That has always been the enigma of Eden Hazard. He was never the type to crave legacy. He never obsessed over personal accolades. He played football because it was fun, not because he wanted to be the greatest. But when the fun stopped, so did he. Unlike players who use every setback as fuel, who see criticism as motivation, who fight against time itself, Hazard never seemed to care enough to push back. His body declined, but his desire faded even faster. But what if something reignited the fire? What if one day he wakes up and realizes he walked away too soon? What if the silence, the absence of competition, the thrill of the game starts haunting him? Would he be willing to suffer to get back? To go through the brutal training he once avoided? To sacrifice the comfort of retirement for one last shot at redemption? And even if he wanted it, could he still do it? Football is cruel to those who stop moving. Speed disappears. Reflexes slow. The explosiveness that once made him unplayable, gone. Could Hazard, after years away from the highest level, recapture even a fraction of his brilliance? Would he be willing to accept a different role, no longer the star, but just another player trying to prove he still belongs? Or would the fear of failure keep him away? His legacy is at a crossroads. Right now, he is remembered as the player who had it all, but never fully committed to greatness. A genius who never pushed himself to the limits. But a comeback. One final chapter where he fights back, where he defies the expectations, could change everything. It wouldn't erase the disappointments of Madrid, but it would redefine him. It would show that he was more than just a player who let talent slip away. But maybe that's not the story he wants. Maybe he looks at football now and feels relief. Relief that he doesn't have to deal with the pressure, the scrutiny, the relentless demand for perfection. Maybe he has already made peace with his career. And if that's true, then the world will have to accept that the Eden Hazard story ended far earlier than it should have. But if you think this story is over, you might be very wrong. Because what happens next will change everything. Eden Hazard's story is one of the most complex in modern football. A player who, at his best, seemed untouchable, dribbling past defenders with the ease of a magician, leaving crowds in awe, creating moments that felt like pure artistry. A player who had the talent to stand alongside the greatest, but never truly fought for that place. The world expected more. Real Madrid expected a new Galactico. Chelsea fans hoped for a homecoming. Even those who doubted him still wanted one final moment of magic, one last dance that would silence all debates. But instead, he chose to fade into the background, leaving behind a career that will forever be questioned. So how will football remember Eden Hazard? Will he be celebrated as one of the most gifted players of his generation? Or will he be a cautionary tale, a reminder that talent alone is never enough? His highlights will live on, his iconic goals, his dazzling footwork, the times when he made the impossible look easy. But alongside those highlights, there will always be the unanswered questions, the what-ifs, the lost potential, the feeling that, had things been different, we could have witnessed a legend instead of a memory. But here's the real question. Is his story really over? Football has a way of surprising us. Just when we think we've seen everything, the game finds a way to rewrite history. Players return, legacies are reshaped, and while Hazard's chapter may seem closed, football never forgets its fallen kings. Maybe, just maybe, there's still one final twist left in his tale. And if you think you've seen it all, you need to watch what's coming next. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now, because the next story will change the way you see football forever.